Let us begin our meditation with metta recital. May all beings be happy and secure. May all beings have happy minds. Whatever living beings there may be, without exception, weak or strong, long, medium, short, visible or invisible, far, over the earth. May all beings have happy minds. Let no one deceive another, nor influence anyone anywhere. Leave them no anger. Should anyone wish yes, mother of all life, to protect the only child, even so to us beings. One should cultivate a boundless heart. One should cultivate all the world, a heart of boundless loving friendliness, above, below, and all around, unobstructed, without hate or resentment, whether standing, walking, sitting, lying down, or whenever awake. One should develop this mindfulness. This is called divinely dwelling here, not falling into erroneous views, but virtuous and endowed with vision, removing desire for sensual pleasures. One comes never again to birth in the womb. We turn off all the lights. Light off. With this metta thought in mind, let us begin our meditation. These instructions I repeat every day, same instructions. When you want to, when I ask you to dig 100 feet, logically you may dig 10 holes with 10 feet each deep and tell me that you have dug or drilled 100 feet. But you cannot get water from digging into the ground only 10 feet. If you want to get water, you have to drill a hole 100 feet deep in one place. Similarly, our instruction must be the same again and again until it drills into our mind and leaves very deep cut, deep groove, so that instructions remain in the mind. And we follow the same instruction again and again. When we focus our mind on an object, we use the same object again and again. In this case, the simplest and easiest object to focus the mind on is our breath. As we breathe in and out, focus mind on the breath. Noticing inhaling as inhaling, exhaling as exhaling. When we do inhaling and exhaling, we notice the expansion and contraction of our lungs area, abdominal area. At the same time, we become aware of the feeling of breath. We perceive the breath mentally. We intentionally pay attention to the breath. We are conscious of the breath. These are what we call our aggregates. The breath is the body, Buddha call it one of the bodies. Breath is one of the bodies. And we feel that belongs to the feeling aggregate. Our perception belongs to the perception aggregate. Intention belongs to the volition aggregate. Consciousness belongs to consciousness aggregate. They all are rising and falling along with the rising and falling of the breath. And then as we keep paying attention to this rising and falling, without verbalizing or conceptualizing, our breath, the mind and body slowly and gradually become calm and relaxed and peaceful. When the body, mind, the feeling, the breath, everything is calm, relaxed and peaceful, no greed can arise. Because greed agitates and excites the mind. In very peaceful state, greed doesn't arise. Whatever greed is there, it fades away. The mind and body becomes even more relaxed, more calm and peaceful. At that time, metta feeling takes roots. Even the metta practice has 3 levels: verbalizing level, thinking level, and feeling level. When the mind and body are calm, we feel metta. We feel that we are one without any discrimination, without any bias or emotion. We all feel as we all are one breathing unit. That time resentment or anger fades away. These two cannot exist together at the same time. Anger or hatred and metta. These are two diametrically opposite mental states. When resentment fades away, metta takes root, the body and mind becomes even more calm, more relaxed and peaceful. Sometimes at that time, we may feel sleepy. We have to overcome sleepiness by focusing the mind on a very bright object, bright light. When the mind is filled with brightness or bright light, sleepiness fades away. And then there can be too much brightness that can energize the mind. When the mind is energized, restlessness and worry can arise. Restlessness arises when we remember various previous activities, things that we have done incorrectly or wrongly, or some traumatic experience we remember, or something we have done incompletely. Mind will recall them, or mind will think of the future, planning the future. Therefore, we have to overcome this mind vacillating between the past and the future by focusing it on the present moment. Present moment is not just mere empty moment. We experience the breath. Whether we are aware or not, breath is going on and on all the time. So here again, we bring our mind deliberately to the present moment and anchor it on the breath. And then we have one more hindrance to overcome. That is our doubt. That is the moment we want to think of the noble, wonderful, marvelous qualities of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, morality, and so forth. Buddha is our supreme enlightened being, and we must have faith in the Buddha's attainment of enlightenment. We must have one that liberated himself totally and completely from all samsaric suffering and followed the Dhamma. Following Dhamma, he attained that state and made the Dhamma his teacher. And that is the Dhamma that noble disciples followed. By following this Dhamma, they also have attained the supreme enlightened states. And we are following that path. Buddha assured us that if we follow the same path, we too can attain the same state of enlightenment. We have overcome our sleepiness, drowsiness, restlessness, worry, doubt, greed, and resentment. These are obstructing our practice, but we manage to overcome them temporarily, and our doubt also can fade away. When these hindrances fade away, we feel as if we are free from debt. free from indebtedness. Anger or resentment is like being sick. When we get rid of anger, we feel that we are free from sickness. Sleepiness is like being in a prison, jail. When we are free from sleepiness and drowsiness, we feel that we are out of jail. Restlessness and worry is like being in a desert where there is no road, no directions, and we got lost. Coming out of restlessness, what do you call it? Doubt is coming out of desert. Restlessness and worry is like being slavery. When we are free from slavery, we feel that we are free from slavery. When we get rid of our restlessness and worry, we feel that we are free from slavery. When we are free from these five hindrances like this, we temporarily have a very joyful state of mind. Joy arises by degrees. It increases, leading up to gaining happiness. Happy state of mind leads to concentration. One whose mind is full of happiness gains concentration. Once you gain concentration, we don't become like a vegetable or inanimate object. That is the state. Mind is very clear, clean, sharp, one-pointed. One-pointedness, wholesome state of mind is called concentration. Once we gain this concentration, we use this concentration to see the subtlest state of mind, impermanence at the subtlest level, impermanence of the body, feeling, perceptions, volition, and consciousness. They are constantly changing. For instance, breath is called body conditioner, kaya sankhara. That means body conditions, the breath conditions the body. How breath conditions the body? The breath is the most vital part of our existence. It brings oxygen to our lungs. It charges hemoglobins that feel depleted of oxygen, that come to the heart pumps to the lungs. When we breathe, all oxygen depleted hemoglobin will be charged with the oxygen that we breathe in. that oxygen-rich hemoglobin goes back to the heart, heart pumps again throughout the entire body, recharging 56 trillion cells in our body. This happens every moment. No cells can exist without oxygen. Therefore, the breath conditions the body. And this constant inner change is taking place all the time. Some of these changes, some of these activities we can experience literally when we gain full concentration. There we see impermanence very clearly. When we see impermanence clearly, greed cannot stay in the mind, hatred cannot stay in the mind, delusion cannot stay in the mind. This is how greed, hatred, and delusion eventually vanish from our mind, leading up to liberating ourselves from suffering. This is what we have to remember, understand how both concentration and mindfulness work together. We start with mindfulness to gain concentration, then use concentration to develop insight very clearly to overcome greed, hatred, and delusion. With these few hints in the form of instruction, I like to stop talking and let us spend few minutes seeing how these things happen in our mind and body. Natti dhanang apanyasa panya natti ajayato yam hijanancha panyacha save nibbana santike. There is no concentration without wisdom, no wisdom without concentration. One who has both wisdom and concentration is close to peace and emancipation. So we have about 5 minutes break and come to the library. Then we continue the program. This will be a Dhamma talk in the library. That's good. There's no room to spread my papers.
I see.
ඒක කරලා කතා කරන්නේ.
එහෙමයි හොඳට බේසික් හතේ.
Okay. Okay. Now can you all hear me? Good morning once again. We want to start this session with some remarks. The discourse that I am going to discuss today is called Nibbedhika Pariyaya Sutta. Originally, you see it on a Nibbedhika Sutta. But Buddha started saying, Nibbedhika Pariyayang o bhikkhave desissami. Nibbedhika Pariyaya. Sutta, the word Sutta means well said. Su-ukta, well said. A particular discourse which has excellent beginning, excellent middle, excellent end is called Sutta because it is Su-ukta, well said. So Buddha's suttas are well said. And also many suttas begin with Evam me suttam. But this sutta starts with straight away Nibbedhika Pariyayang o bhikkhave desissami. That is how it is recorded. Evam me suttam, this passive voice sentence is translated into various languages. Thus have I heard and attributed to Venerable Ananda. But there are many suttas that Venerable Ananda himself said. Somebody. Some kind of ghost. Some kind of ghost. It's okay? There are many discourses when Ananda himself has delivered. If Evam me suttam is attributed to Venerable Ananda, then there arises a question. Why did he say Evam me suttam if it is if he recited certain or taught certain suttas, he doesn't have to say Evang Me Sutam, because he delivered this discourse. You all remember the first council, there were 500 fully enlightened arahants, including Venerable Ananda. And they came from various teachers. Hariputta's disciples were there, Moggallana's disciples were there, Mahakassapa's disciples were there. These venerable monks, arahants, reported to the council, and they said, not only Venerable Ananda, but also when Venerable Ananda said what he has heard from the Buddha, he said Evang Me Sutam. If other Venerable monks have listened to Dhamma, delivered even by Venerable Ananda, they would have said Evang Me Sutam. So the Evang Me Sutam could be attributed not only to Venerable Ananda, but also to several other arahants, monks. Therefore, this, I think, is this is what I understand. When you read Pali discourses, you can see some discourses delivered, reported at the council without Evang Me Sutam, like Karaniya Metta Sutta, Ratana Sutta, this discourse, and so forth. Even, I think, Venerable Mahakassapa, who presided over the meeting, might have mentioned that he heard this discourses from the Buddha. I just want to point out these two points. One is the meaning of sutta, other is the beginning passive sentence called Evang Me Sutam. Now, I like to bring some highlights of this discourse. This is a very popular discourse and often mentioned, quoted in commentaries. In fact, each of the analytical schemes of the 6 defilements, sensual desire, etc., in this discourse, is built upon the structure of the 4 noble truths. With additional factors of diversity and of results. Anguttara Nikaya commentary glosses over diversity as various causes. Vemattata. Vemattata jnana karanang. Nana karanang. In other words, it serves as an elaboration of the 2nd noble truth. If you have read the discourse, when I mention these highlights, perhaps you can remember the points drawn out of the discourse and the results, vipaka. This I like to bring out one more important thing. That is in the discourse itself, we find very popular stanza. That is Sankappa Rago Purusasya Kamo Nete Kamayani Chitrani Loke Sankappa Rago Purusasya Kamo Chitranti Chitrani Tatheva Loke Atekta Dhira Vinayanti Chandan, which means I like to take line by line to explain it. I just want to start this highlight before I just go through the whole discourse. First line. Sankappa Rago Purusasya Kamo. The thought of lust is a person's desire. Thought of lust is the person's desire. Sankappa. In some places we say Satipatthana Sankappa. Sankappa means thought. We will come in detail explanation later on. We all talk about Samma Sankappa and Sankappa Gochara. Samma Sankappa Gochara. Then Sankappa Rago. Raga or desire is in the mind, and that is one's desire. Netre kamiyani chitrani loke. There are no sensual pleasures in the world, in the wanderers in the world. That is, pretty things in the world is not the pleasure. Pretty things in the world are not our pleasures. Third line says, Sankappa Rago Purusasya Kamo, thought of lust is person's desire. Titetta chitrani tatheva loke. Tittanti loke tatheva loke. Those objects remain, these pretty objects in the world remains just as they are. Pretty things remains as they are. And they are not our desires. So, atetta dhira vinayanti chandan. So here the wise remove desires from them. This is very important, this aspect and this discourse. Now let us go through the discourse gradually and then try to understand the whole discourse as it is translated into English. Buddha said, sensual, these are the 6 sets of 6. This is just like Chakka Sutta. But this 6 of 6 is the entire summary of the Buddha's teaching in a different form. What are the 6 of 6? First 6 is sensual pleasure should be understood. That is number 1, sensual pleasure. The second, the source and origin of sensual pleasure should be understood. Third is diversity of sensual pleasure should be understood. The fourth is the results of sensual pleasure should be understood. The fifth is cessation of the sensual pleasure should be understood. And the sixth is the path, the way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasure should be understood. You can, I think it will ring a bell in your mind when you see this. That means explaining 4 noble truths in a different form. Explaining dependent origination in a different form. Now, these are the most essential teachings of the Buddha: 4 noble truths and dependent origination. And the 5 aggregates. Then sensual pleasures, first karma, and then feelings. Feeling is one of the 5 aggregates. Feeling should be understood. Origin of feeling should be understood. Diversity of feeling should be understood. And then results of, I think probably we never heard before, the results of feeling. One special thing in this discourse is Buddha talk about the results of feeling should be understood. The cessation of feeling should be understood. And the way leading to the cessation of feeling should be understood. Then sanya, perception. The same pattern. 6 steps. Perception and the origin and source of perception. And then the third is the diversity. Diversity and results are 2 things in addition to 4 noble truths: diversity and results. Diversity of perception should be understood. Results of perception should be understood. Cessation of perception should be understood. and the way leading to the cessation of perception should be understood. Then taints asava. Asava has another meaning. One is taints, other is influx or fermentation. I think fermentation is better term for asava, because in Ayurvedic tradition, there is a drink called asrava, drakshasrava, like that asrava. Asrava is something that is brewed, various kind of things bring together, make it a concoction, and buried in the ground for a certain period of time. And then when you take it out, it has a very great strength, like alcohol. You brew for a long time. When you brew it, it increases its force, power to intoxicate the body, mind. So asrava is kind of intoxicants that can make us deluded, confused. And therefore asava, the English translation should be fermentation or fermented something. That should be understood. That also has 6 stages, as before. It's fermentation itself, its source, diversity, results, cessation, and the way leading to the cessation. And then karma should be understood. The source of karma should be understood. Diversity of karma should be understood. And results of karma should be understood. Cessation of karma should be understood. And the path or way to lead into the cessation should be understood. Here, is the karma that destroys karma. Karma khaye karma. Karma khaye karma. We all know all about karma, but seldom do we talk about the karma that destroys karma. Karma khaye karma. We can see this here. There is another place, 2 places. One is Anguttara Nikaya, 4th section, Chatukka Nipata. Other is Kukkuravatika Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya. In both discourses, Buddha showed a way to destroy karma. One is called kammang sukkang sukha vipakang, karma, dark karma, with dark results. Then dark and white karma, with dark and white results. And neither dark nor white karma, that is without dark results or white results. That is called karma kaya karma. That we can find in Kukkuravatika Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya and in Anguttara Nikaya for what is called fourth group, Chatukka Nipata. So here, karma should be understood, the source and origin of karma should be understood, diversity of karma should be understood, the results of karma should be understood, the cessation of karma should be understood. Cessation of karma should be understood, and the way leading to the cessation of karma should be understood. That shows the way of ceasing, stopping, bringing karma to an end. It is called karma kaya karma. Then the last is suffering, dukkha. And that also is the same as Four Noble Truths, except diversity and results. Now, in details, Buddha says, when it was said, sensual pleasure should be understood, and so forth, he repeated the same thing. And then cessation and so forth. For what reason was this said? There are bhikkhus, these 5 objects of sensual pleasures. When he said sensual pleasure or karma should be understood, karma should be understood in terms of 5 chords of sensual pleasures. 5 chords of sensual pleasures. Kama guna. They are form cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, pleasing, connected with sensual pleasures, tantalizing. With these qualities, the sensual pleasure should be understood. Now, I want to go back to the stanza that I mentioned earlier. These qualities are not in the object. These kama guna are not in the objects. We attribute these qualities to the object. We attribute, we give this object to the qualities to the object. Object themselves don't have these qualities. We see many different objects. Here, suppose there are 100 people. 100 people look at the same object and can have 100 different opinions, 100 different views, 100 different ways of interpretation, 100 different of feelings. Where does all this come from? Not from the object, but in our own inner makeup. we have built up certain tendencies, certain attitudes, certain tastes, certain moods within us. And depending on our own state of mind, we interpret the object. When they interpret the object, they become to us they with the eye we desire. Suppose I have this, I like it. Desire rises in me. Suppose you hate it, anger rises in you. But this doesn't give us hate or desire. This doesn't give. But I like use because I know how to use this. I know how to make it. I know its value. I know I can exchange it something else. And so forth and so on. I have so many use of this. According to that, I like it. And you have not, you never think of anything, you never give any value to this. It is just another object. What is this? He's talking about the value of this. Nonsense. Disappointment arises in you. Dislike arises in you. Indifference arises in you. But this cannot have all these things. That is why the Buddha said in the first lesson, this stanza, in my highlight I mentioned, they are not sensual pleasures. They are not sensual pleasures. They are just objects. The pretty things in the world remain as pretty. Whether they are pretty or ugly depends on our own perception. And therefore, this passage is very important. Objects of sensual pleasures, and they are desirable, agreeable, pleasing, connected with sensual pleasures, tantalizing, all this. Same goes with the sound. You hear my voice, you may hate my voice because this is not very sharp, not clean, not musical, not so pleasing to your ears. You say, this is a nuisance. You fall asleep, you hate it. Another person listen to it and think this is a beautiful voice, beautiful Dhamma, beautiful this. And that person is pleased with the voice. Music, songs, speech, commercial advertisements, political talks, and all this. Some people hate, some people like. But the voice is the same. Voice is the same. Attitudes are different. And therefore, pretty things are there. Let them be pretty. Whether you call them ugly or pretty depends on your own mental state. So, where am I now? Okay. Okay. Then next thing is the discourse. Okay. I have turned upside down. So you have to forgive me for this delay. The second, no, this is thank you. It's better because these bigger letters. Okay. What bhikkhus is the source and origin of sensual pleasures? Contact is the source and origin of sensual pleasures. Sensual pleasure or contact is the origin of sensual pleasures. If there is no contact, whatsoever, sensual pleasures cannot arise. Now, when our eyes, visual objects come together, consciousness arises, meeting these three is called contact. Now, as long as we have senses, sensory objects are there. As soon as we encounter these sensory objects, consciousness arises and the feeling arises. Sensual pleasure arises from that feeling. If the feeling happens to be pleasant, desire arises. Because sensual pleasure has tendency or underlying tendency called greed. And therefore, from sensual pleasure arises greed because of the underlying tendency. And that happens because of the contact. And what is the result of sensual pleasures? Now, the results of sensual pleasures and what is the diversity of sensual pleasures? Now, that's what I forgot. Diversity, sensual desire for form is one thing, sensual desire for sound is another, sensual desire for order is still another, sensual desire for taste is still another, and sensual desire for contact of what you call tangible object is another. Now, this is diversity of sensual pleasures. That is, the pleasure arises from the eye is different from the pleasure arising through the ear. Sensual pleasure arising through the nose is different from the sensual pleasure arising from the hearing. Although it is sensual pleasures, but the source of sensual pleasures are sources different. And that is the diversity. Sensual pleasure doesn't arise only from one sensory, what you call, one faculty. Since we have 6 faculties, 6 indriyas, sensual pleasure arises from all these 6 faculties. Somebody may like the sound. Someone may like the sight, seeing. Someone may like the smell. Someone may like the taste better than other sensual desires. So, even the sensual desires, sensual pleasures arise from different senses in different persons in a different way. And therefore, diversity of sensual pleasure should be understood in this way. Then, and what is the result of sensual pleasures? One produces an individual existence that corresponds with whatever sense pleasures one desires, and which may be the consequence either of merit or demerit. This is called results of sensual pleasure. Now, according to our desire, sensual pleasures, we generate wholesomeness in our mind or unwholesomeness in our mind. Depending on wholesomeness or unwholesome, we commit wholesome or unwholesome thought. Wholesome or unwholesome thought becomes karma. And therefore, Buddha goes to the next one. And what is the cessation of sensual pleasures? With the cessation of contact, sensual pleasures ceases. And that sounds, as I mentioned at the beginning, the formula of dependent origination. In the dependent origination, we hear, with the cessation of contact, feeling ceases. With the Phassa Nirodha, Vedana Nirodha. Phassa Nirodha, Vedana Nirodha. The same thing is repeated here. With the cessation of contact, feeling ceases. And the way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasures is Noble Eightfold Path. Now, let us pause for a second and ask this question. How Noble Eightfold Path helps us to cease sensual pleasures? We all know Noble Eightfold Path, we all know how Noble Eightfold Path leads the way to cease sensual pleasures. Number one, Buddha started saying these things should be understood. What should be sensual pleasure should be understood. Source of sensual pleasure should be understood. Diversity of sensual pleasure should be understood. And the results of sensual pleasure should be understood. Cessation and so forth should be understood. Understanding sensual pleasures itself does not help to seize it. Noble Eightfold Path is the way to seize sensual pleasures. How can we use your Noble Eightfold Path to seize sensual pleasures? Because in the first place, we must understand what is the Noble Eightfold, what Noble Eightfold Path is. We all know number one is understanding. How understanding can seize sensual pleasures? To understand how understanding can sensual pleasures, we must understand what understanding is. Understanding is understanding of what? Understanding of Four Noble Truths. Number one is suffering. We must understand suffering arises from impermanence. Yada nityam tan dukkham. When we understand everything is impermanent, sensual pleasure also is impermanent. We understand sensual pleasure is not something permanent. Sensual pleasure is impermanent. When we understand impermanence of sensual pleasures, we will not be engaged in performing sensual pleasures. That is why the Buddha said that sabbe sankhara anicchati yada panyaya pasati ata nibbindati dukkhe esamaggo visuddhya. Another place Buddha says sabbe sankhara sabbe yato yato sammasati khandanang udayabhyang labati piti pamajjang amatantang vijanatang. Seeing rising and falling of all five aggregates, joy arises. Yato yato sammasati khandanang udayabhyang. As aggregates rises and falls, if one sees rising and falling of aggregates, that moment, that person experiences piti pamojja, joy and tranquility. Joy and tranquility, that very moment. That is like experiencing Nibbana. Labati tit pamajjang amatang tang vijanatang. That is like ambrosia or like immortality. That is one thing we have to remember. There again, understanding. What we understand, rising and falling, rising and falling, rising and falling. Sensual pleasures rises and falls. And therefore, this is how Noble Eightfold Path helps us to cease, to get rid of sensual pleasures. Getting rid of sensual pleasures means getting rid of our desire for sensual pleasures. That is the cessation of suffering. That is the last step of the Noble Eightfold, what you call the third step, that is Nibbana. Other is even more important. Sabbe sankhara anicchati Yada panyaya pasati. Now, the first one, yato yato samati santana udayabhyam, we experience rising and falling of aggregates. In the second stanza, sabbe sankara anityati yada panyaya, that is panyaya pasati. Seeing all sankharas are impermanent with wisdom. We see all sankharas are impermanent with wisdom. Because there are certain things that we cannot experience all the time. But we can infer or come to a conclusion through wisdom. Sabbe sankhara anityati yada panyaya pasati. Ata nibbindati dukkhe. That is even more important to understand. Nibbindati, this discourse is Nibbedhika. Nibbindati is one thing, Nibbedhika is another. Nibbindati is disenchanting or disenchants. Nibbinda. Disenchantment does not mean something negative. Disenchantment is explained very beautifully in last discourse of Madhyama Nikaya called Indriya Bhavana Sutta. Indriya Bhavana Sutta. There's a marvelous discourse to understand what disenchantment is. That is, yada panyaya pati, ata nibbindati dukkhe. When we say nibbindati, disenchanted of dukkha, has anybody being enchanted with dukkha? Has anybody being enchanted with dukkha? For that person to be disenchanted with dukkha later on? Yes. We enjoy dukkha. How do we enjoy dukkha? We enjoy sukha. Yo sukhang abhinanditi, so dukkhang abhinandati. Yo sukhang abhinandati, so dukkhang abhinandati. If somebody enjoys the pleasure, enjoys displeasure. Displeasure means dukkha. Can you enjoy pleasure without dukkha? No. Every pleasure has dukkha entailed. Every pleasure has dukkha, and dukkha entailed in every pleasure. Or every pleasure entails dukkha. That is why I very often say, you buy one, get one free. You buy one, get one free. What you buy, you work very hard to buy that. And along with that, you get that free one. What is free one? Is dukkha. You don't look for it, but it comes along as a part of the package. You cannot say, I have only pleasure, I don't want displeasure. So inadvertently, we enjoy pain while enjoying pleasure. That is why Buddha said, Sabbe Sankara Anicca Yada Panyaya Pasati. We have to say it with wisdom. Ata Nibbindati Dukkhe. Only then can we be disenchanted with suffering. While enjoying pleasure, if we don't have wisdom, we don't see the underlying tendency of pain in the pleasure. And therefore, Sabbe Sankara Dukkhati, Sabbe Sankara Anicca, Sabbe Sankara Dukkhati. Second stanza is even more tricky. Sabbe Sankara Dukkhati Yada Panyaya Pasati, Ata Nibbindati Dukkhe. Esamago Visuddhya. So, the last is Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. Sabbe Dhamma Anattati Yada Panyaya Pasati, Ata Nibbindati Dukkhe Esamago Visuddhya. All dhammas are without self, should be understood with wisdom. Now, here is something we don't experience. No self we don't experience. No self teaching, or no, the reality of non-self should be understood with wisdom. Only with wisdom we can understand that there is no self. We cannot experience that we don't have self. And therefore, the cessation of karma, desire, or cessation of desire can be done by practicing Noble Eightfold Path. The path leading to the cessation of desire is the Noble Eightfold Path. My question was, how can we stop desire by following the Noble Eightfold Path? In the Noble Eightfold Path, number one is right understanding. When we understand impermanence, that which is impermanence is unsatisfactory, adanityam dukkhan, and therefore sensual pleasure is impermanent. That which is impermanent is suffering, and that we have the problem with all sankharas. Pleasure is sankhara in the wider sense of the term. Sensual pleasure is sankhara, and that doesn't have self. That sankhara is impermanent. That is therefore unsatisfactory. That is therefore there is no self, permanent self. This whole series of steps of cessation should be understood should be understood. That is right understanding. That is the first step of the Noble Eightfold Path. So whenever we say such and such is the path leading to the end of suffering, that is the Noble Eightfold Path, then we must understand how we apply Noble Eightfold Path to cease this particular state called suffering. Okay? And then, when it is lead to cessation of pleasure. Okay. With regard to feelings, and then, yes, also feeling with regard to the third is perception. All these have the same pattern. Perhaps if I cannot finish it, I cannot finish it now, we can continue this afternoon, other part of this discourse. Now, the 10th asava. The last is, what do you call it? Yes, karma, and then suffering. Okay, I think these parts, normally in the afternoon, we have questions and answers. But afternoon, I continue the rest of the things very quickly in the afternoon and let you ask me questions. When you come in the afternoon, I think at 2 o'clock, please don't be bashful, don't be shy to ask me questions. From now till 2 o'clock, almost 3 hours you have time to think of some questions. Friends, this whole retreat makes very meaningful if we convert our talks into discussion. Because we all can participate in our discussion and we all can learn from each other. I learn from you, you learn from me. That is how it should be. Anyamanya vachanena, anyamanya uttapanena. That is how we work together. I think this, you heard the gong rang twice. And therefore we have to stop it, this session, because we have Buddha Puja and so forth. And thank you very much for your very patient and attention to this little talk. Thank you.